So, when Stellar Blade first came out for PS5, many people wrote it off, including myself, as just being eye candy with probably not much substance behind it. But over time, I kept hearing about this game in one way or another. And sure, a lot of that conversation is around Eve, the main character, and her, assets. I mean, it's nearly impossible to not see how the media paints this game as shallow, and how you should feel bad about playing it because you're nothing but a creepy gooner. But I also heard plenty of others talking about the competent game that was kind of hidden underneath. So when the PC version was announced, I put it firmly in my radar and patiently waited for my time to try it. Before its release, Shift Up, the game's developer, put a demo up for everyone to try, and so I did. And I really enjoyed what I played, and not just because Eve is hot. Believe me, that helps. But the actual game was substantially better than what I was expecting. And I was surprised at how solid the actual game felt to play. So that made me that much more excited for the full release. Now, fast forward to its release, and lo and behold, I absolutely love it. Now, before I start gushing over the actual gameplay side of things and giving some legitimate criticism, let's get some things out of the way. Like I said at the start, Eve is hot, like insanely so. And it's to the point where her being beautiful and having some, shall we say, revealing outfits have turned most of the conversation around this game to be just about her and how the game is paper thin without her being in there. And more than a few media outlets have taken issue again recently with its success. Because we can't have games geared towards men anymore, it has to be for everyone. And if it isn't, you are going to be attacked. Outlets still claim it's just a gooner game and that you should feel bad for enjoying it. And I think this is total BS. And while initially before playing the game, I felt nearly the same way, minus the pointless gooner point of view, but not because of the outlets and sensitive Twitter activists, but because there was a visible trend that when games have such an emphasis on sexy characters, they have a paper thin game to accompany them. A good example is The First Descendant, who haven't been exactly subtle with their marketing. But at the same time, The First Descendant has consistently lost players since its release, not because it's terrible, but because it doesn't have the kind of depth and longevity that it needs to hold players' attention outside of buying things for your sexy characters. Now, that being said, is Eve's appearance a big part of the game? Yes, there is a lot of customization to be had, a lot of outfits to find. So, yeah, I would say it is a big part of it. But is there also a solid, if not fantastic, action game existing alongside it? Absolutely. And it honestly reminds me of times on consoles like PlayStation 2 when there were many games that also had strong, hot female protagonists in an action game, and the games themselves were also very good. You can look at Blood Rain for one of those examples, a fantastic game. So let's get into what Stellar Blade is all about, and why I think it's actually better than I think most people are even expecting. When playing through the intro of the game, I had a few different games come to mind. First and foremost being the much talked about Nier Automata. The comparisons for mood and tone here are definitely justified, as it shares a lot of DNA with Automata. These things range from being a hot woman running around with a sword during a post-apocalyptic setting, to melancholic music and the story that really tackles things like humanity and other thought-provoking subjects. Elsewhere, there are elements taking inspiration from the likes of Bayonetta, Dark Souls, and even a dash of Dead Space thrown in for good measure, especially in the enemy designs and some specific encounters throughout the game. And yet somehow, all of these elements come together in a cohesive manner that has kept me engaged for the entirety of my playthrough so far. I played this game for 40 hours and I beat the main story, and it has already kept me around longer than I ever expected. And I still look forward to its New Game Plus mode, which I've heard is very good and adds a lot to the game. But at the start, it does feel a bit shallow and basic, but it has a lot of promise. And it does end up delivering on that with many abilities and tools becoming available. And with these tools, the game opened up even more, and I found myself wanting to explore the world that had been built here. I started running around side questing and figuring out all the secrets and puzzles I possibly could, as everything you do in this game has some kind of tangible reward. whether that being upgrade materials, items for use in battle, or cosmetic outfits, of which, to no surprise, there are a lot of. I definitely have my favorites. The side quests here range from the typical bulletin board style fetch quests, scavenger hunts, and fishing to more intricate storyline based side missions that deal with some really interesting characters, some of which were the highlight of my playthrough, with characters I grew to even care about. My personal favorites being Sue and Enya, who run a bar in the last known city of Zion. Enya, who is the singer for the bar Entertainment, has been reduced to just a torso and is unable to communicate when you first meet her. And she has her partner Sue, who protects and takes care of her. Without spoiling the whole storyline, it was great to help Sue and Enya improve their overall life in different ways. And I even loved meeting Kasim, who becomes your glorified hairdresser, after kind of insulting Eve at first, mind you.
How dull.
He offers to work on Eve's hair in exchange for a favor, and you will meet many others while roaming around questing, but even apart from them, Eve has her own companions that join her on this journey, each with their own story to tell, even if you don't get quite as much with them as you would like. And even with that being said, I really did enjoy their inclusion and the camaraderie between Eve and her buddies. I will say the quality of voice acting for a lot of characters can vary pretty wildly though, with some lines that come off a bit flat at times, including with Eve. And there seems to be a lack of emotional punch when they're hoping to get something out of the player. But I can safely say that I have been intrigued enough in the world, its history, and Eve's story, more than enough to enjoy my time playing through it. And for those who love the gameplay and story, there is the New Game Plus option that I mentioned before to start again, but with this time keeping all the outfits and everything you found, including new skills for purchase in this new mode that you don't get access to in your first playthrough, and a higher difficulty to bring up the challenge since you're going to be coming in swinging really hard. Now, speaking of swinging hard and about the combat, let's now talk about the real meat and potatoes of this game, the combat. Combat in Stellar Blade is a ton of fun, but it will feel a bit familiar for action game fans, as it borrows heavily from a lot of other games in its genre. Some of these inspirations are pretty apparent too. There is a little Bayonetta here, a little Souls-like gameplay there, and a lot of, like I mentioned with the story, a lot of Nier too. But over time, it brings its own flavor to the table. In this game, there is really only one melee weapon for Eve, her sword, which I noticed after a few hours doubles as an accessory for Eve's hair. And yes, that is a long time to not notice, but I digress. Which, along with some of the combat, kind of reminded me of Bayonetta's shoes, which doubled as guns for her. But thankfully, Eve's sword can be upgraded with new combos, special beta and burst attacks, evasive and offensive abilities, and a ton of other enhancements through a pretty well-designed skill tree. And in these skill trees themselves, you can focus on different types of upgrades like survival skills, combat skills, or beta skills, or even ranged drone weapons later in the game, and one unlocked later that should remain a secret, but is reminiscent of Devil May Cry's Devil Trigger mode. As an example, one of the most impactful upgrades is called Blink, which lets you flank your opponent from behind during a large attack to get some hits off when you're at a much safer backside of the enemy. Tying this together with her beta and burst skills can instantly give you a leg up. And when you start messing with different kinds of upgrades like exospines and gear slots, then the build crafting starts to take shape. And while not super in depth like some would really like or maybe used to, there are plenty of combinations available throughout the game that you can change your fighting style in some significant ways. It's all very, very intuitive and very fun to kind of mess around with and see what you really like playing with. And later in your playthrough, you will unlock that drone firearm that I was talking about as your exclusive weapon. It also has multiple firing modes to try out, everything from guided missiles to a charged laser beam to decimate enemies with. and even fits well into Eve's core fighting style as she can expose enemy weak points with some moves, separate herself from the target, and unleash hell at range in a single combat loop. Needless to say, there is definitely more to this game than I had expected at all. And that's before we even start talking about the open areas that are littered with secrets, puzzles, hidden items to find and solve. With all of these, I was even more surprised with the variety of different activities that I had done in the game. There is an entire fishing mechanic that you can pour hours into all by itself, which my girlfriend and I found to be pretty fun, taking turns fishing around and trying to fill out the data bank with entries to unlock new outfits, better bait, to catch bigger fish, all of which have a point value that can be redeemed for upgrades to your fishing, combat, or cosmetics. There are even segments that incorporate a kind of skating minigame down dangerous hypertubes that was pretty awesome by themselves. And the same can be said for the variety of smaller puzzles, whether doing quick button combinations, timing based grid puzzles, and even a minigame later that stretches your brain while having you pull two different paths with each stick in a kind of Brothers A Tale of Two Sons style minigame, where you can't cross things a certain way, that tripped me up quite a bit. I am truly impressed with Shift Up Studios and the sheer gameplay variety that they have packed into this game. Even the enemy variety tends to be shaken up quite frequently through the course of the game as you transition from area to area. There is, however, a few areas of this game that kind of stumble. The first of these, to me at least, is traversal and level design. Now, I don't dislike the levels here, especially not to the extent that some others do. But when going through some areas multiple times, which you absolutely will do if you are side questing, you will notice that the areas aren't very engaging to move through by themselves, and sometimes actively annoying. Mostly due to the kind of disjointed fast travel system that has some baffling locations that pointlessly were further from their point of interest than they needed to be. An example of this is with Clyde, your fisherman buddy, whose nearest fast travel point is across the oasis where he's at, seemingly for no reason other than to pad some playtime and make you run to the other side to talk to him. And this usually wouldn't be an annoyance of mine, but while going through the fishing quests and having to buy bait and speak to him a lot on return trips, it got on my nerves every time I had to go back and forth from anywhere and back to him. But for anyone who's just running through the story with some light exploration, I don't think it'll be much of a pain point for you. There is one aspect of the game, however, that I think everyone will have maybe the same criticism about, and that's the story, the characters, and some of the dialogue. While not offensively bad or anything, it's clear that this was the least focused on aspect of the game for Shift Up. The director has even come out and stated that it was the very last thing that they had put together, so it didn't have as long to flesh out. This shows in many aspects, from the dialogue and some flat performances during moments when they're supposed to be more impactful moments than they come off, to some characters like your partners, Lily and Adam, not getting a ton of love when it comes to their backstory, save for a few choice moments throughout and one kind of a detour toward the tail end of the game. Most of the world building and characterization, even with Eve, are in descriptions for items or in many lore entries scattered around the world, whether that be from memory sticks from fallen comrades, newspapers, flyers, holograms, and even data entries that can be bought with your currency. There is a lot to read here, and while I don't mind reading a lot, especially when done well, I do think there is a lot of details that make the story much more interesting that are mostly going to be lost on people, being as they're here to kill monsters and look good doing it. And even though a lot of story events can be seen a mile away, I did enjoy the journey to the end at least. On the technical side of things, there is thankfully not a lot of issues. I think this stands as one of Sony's best ports from their exclusive titles, and even when compared to other PC game releases recently. The game runs in Unreal Engine 4, which has a lot less pain points than the much recently used UE5 games. That's not to say there are no issues though, as some frame drops and stutters here and there are quite common if you're pushing high and very high settings. This is an issue that happens with a lot of UE4 games, as it's a texture streaming issue, and textures are likely being loaded in at the times when you see all of the stutter and frame drops. But thankfully, it's mostly during traversal between areas, so combat and platforming sections are largely unaffected. So credit to Shift Up and their high quality port that they have already put out updates for to minimize these issues. So overall, I am really impressed with the quality of this game, and not because it didn't look high quality in the first place, but because usually in the pursuit of having beautiful characters, like I said, with let's say fan service, gameplay is usually sacrificed. But here, it seems like the exception, with equal effort put into the game. So I want to leave you with this. There is nothing wrong with making a game for dudes. This extends to having a sexy main protagonist. So don't listen to people when they want to shame you for enjoying something like this. People love attractive characters and always have. And as a man, I gotta say it's always refreshing to feel like the target audience, especially in a climate of every company trying to please everybody and make games for everyone, instead of just making their game with a specific demographic in mind. If it isn't for you, that's perfectly fine. But this was a great time for nearly anyone who would want to play a game with a hot lady wielding a sword against some grotesque enemies. So go check this out when you can. I promise you'll have a good time. Thanks so much for coming by and watching and listening to my review for Stellar Blade. I hope you really enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you would like to hear more from me, and like the video if you enjoyed it, as it really helps to get it out to people who otherwise would never see it. Have a wonderful day, and happy gooning, my friends. Peace.